Okay, real talk. You grab your watering can, you pour water into your plant pot, and instead of soaking into the soil, it just disappears out the bottom. Like, immediately. Like the soil literally wants nothing to do with the water. And you're standing there thinking, did I just water my plant or did I just water my floor? Because it feels like the soil is actively rejecting the water, like some kind of botanical bouncer. Not today. Not in my pot. If that has happened to you, you are not alone, and more importantly, you are not doing anything wrong. What you are dealing with has a name. It's called hydrophobic soil. And today we're going to talk about exactly what it is, why it happens, how to know if your plant is actually suffering because of it, and 3 ways you can fix it right now, today, at home, with things you probably already have. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Urban Plant Fix, the channel where we make indoor plant care actually make sense for real people with real plants and real problems. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new, hit that subscribe button because we do this every week. Real plant problems, real solutions, no fluff. Now, before we get into the science of what's happening inside your pot, I want you to do a little test with me right now if you can. Grab one of your plants, ideally one that's been sitting dry for a while, and pour just a small amount of water on the surface of the soil. Watch what happens. Does the water just sit on top for a second before slowly sinking in? That's normal. Does the water instantly run down the inside edges of the pot and shoot straight out the drainage hole? That's the problem we're talking about today. Keep that observation in mind as we go through this video because it's going to help you diagnose exactly what's happening in your specific situation. What is hydrophobic soil? So, what is actually going on here? Let's start from the beginning. Potting mix, the stuff most of us buy in bags from the garden center, is not just dirt. It's a blend of different materials. You've got things like peat moss, coco coir, perlite, bark, sometimes vermiculite, sometimes compost. And the job of this mix is to hold just enough moisture to keep your plant's roots happy, while also draining fast enough that the roots don't sit in water and rot. The thing is, some of those materials, especially peat moss, which is incredibly common in commercial potting mixes, have a really interesting characteristic. When they're slightly moist, they absorb water beautifully. But when they dry out completely, and I mean completely bone dry, they stop absorbing water. They actually start to repel it. This is what hydrophobic means. Hydro means water. Phobic means fear of or repelling. So, hydrophobic soil is soil that has become so dry that it physically cannot absorb water anymore. The surface tension of the dry particles causes water to run off instead of soaking in. The water takes the path of least resistance, which is down the gap between the dry soil and the edge of the pot, straight out the drainage hole at the bottom. And here's the cruel irony of the whole situation. You see water coming out of the drainage hole, so you think, great, the plant got watered. But it didn't. The water never actually reached the roots. It just tunneled down the sides and escaped. Your plant is still completely dry. Now, why does potting mix get this dry in the first place? A few reasons. First, if you let your plant go too long without water, which honestly happens to everyone, especially in winter when we think plants need less water, the soil dries out past that point of no return. Second, over time potting mix naturally breaks down and compresses. The organic materials decompose. The mix loses its structure. It becomes denser and less porous, which makes it more prone to going hydrophobic. Third, some plants, I'm looking at you, cacti and succulents, are kept in extremely fast-draining mixes on purpose, and those mixes can go hydrophobic very quickly if they're not watered on a consistent schedule. So, now you know what's happening. Let's talk about how to know if your plant is actually being harmed. Signs your plant is suffering. This is important because sometimes people have hydrophobic soil for a while without realizing the plant is in trouble. Here are the signs to watch for. Sign number 1. Wilting even though you just watered. This is the big one. If your plant is drooping and you think, that's weird, I watered it 2 days ago, go check the soil. Stick your finger 2 inches deep. If it's completely dry 2 inches down despite having been watered recently, there's a very good chance the water isn't reaching the roots. Wilting plus dry, deep soil equals water is not getting where it needs to go. Sign number 2. Yellowing lower leaves. When a plant is chronically underwatered, even if you think you're watering regularly, it starts dropping its older lower leaves first. The plant is conserving resources. It's sacrificing the older foliage to keep the newer growth alive. If you're seeing yellow leaves falling from the bottom of the plant and the soil always seems to dry out super fast, hydrophobic soil could absolutely be the culprit. Sign number 3. Soil pulling away from the edges of the pot. Take a look at the gap between your soil and the inside rim of the pot. If there's a visible gap, like the soil has shrunk and there's a ring of empty space around the edge, that is a dead giveaway that the soil is extremely dry and has physically contracted. And that gap is exactly the channel that water flows down when you try to water, escaping before it can soak in. Sign number 4. Water runs out immediately when you pour it in. We talked about this in the intro. If you pour water on the soil, and within 2 or 3 seconds you see it draining out the bottom, without the soil visibly darkening on the surface, the water is not being absorbed. It's bypassing the root zone entirely. Sign number 5. The pot feels lighter than expected. Pick up your pot, carefully obviously. A pot with properly moist soil should feel noticeably heavy. If a pot that's supposedly been watered still feels very light, the soil inside is dry. You can also try tapping the side of a terracotta pot. Dry soil inside produces a hollow, high-pitched sound. Moist soil produces a lower, dull thud. Now, let's talk about how to fix it. Fix 1. Bottom watering. Fix number 1 is my personal favorite, and I recommend it as your first go-to for most houseplants. Bottom watering. Here's the idea. Instead of pouring water on top of the soil and hoping it soaks in, which we've established it might not do, you let the soil absorb water from the bottom up, through the drainage holes. Here's exactly how to do it. Get a basin, a bowl, a sink, a bucket, whatever you have that's bigger than your pot. Fill it with room temperature water. You want enough water to come about 1/3 to halfway up the outside of the pot. Now place your pot in the water and leave it. Just leave it. Don't pour anything on top. What happens is that the dry soil, which is hydrophobic from the top, is actually still capable of wicking moisture upward from the bottom through a process called capillary action. Water slowly moves up through the soil particles from bottom to top, gradually re-wetting the entire root zone. Depending on how dry your soil is and how big your pot is, this can take anywhere from 20 minutes to a full hour. You'll know it's done when the top surface of the soil feels damp to the touch. That means moisture has traveled all the way up from the drainage holes to the top of the soil. At that point, lift the pot out of the water, let it drain freely for a few minutes, and you're done. One important note, don't leave your pot sitting in standing water for more than about an hour. Once the soil is thoroughly saturated, you want to get it out of the water to avoid root rot. Bottom watering is about thorough rehydration, not waterlogging. Bottom watering works for almost all houseplants. It's especially great for plants with leaves that don't like getting wet, like African violets and some succulents. And once you've bottom watered and the soil is moist again, you can usually go back to top watering normally, as long as you don't let it get that dry again. Fix 2. Wetting agent. Fix number 2 is something a lot of people have never heard of, and when I tell you it sounds almost too simple, I want you to stay with me because it actually works really well for certain situations. A wetting agent is a substance that reduces the surface tension of water, allowing it to penetrate and spread through dry, hydrophobic soil much more effectively. Think of it like a surfactant. It makes water wetter, essentially. It breaks down the barrier that's causing your dry soil to repel moisture. Now, the fancy, expensive version of this is a commercial soil wetting agent, which you can buy at most garden centers. You dilute it in water and use it to water your plant. After treatment, the soil becomes much more receptive to water for weeks. But here's the super simple DIY version that actually does a similar job for houseplants. A tiny drop of regular dish soap in your watering can. And I mean tiny, we're talking one single drop in a full watering can, maybe 2 liters of water. The surfactant in dish soap works on the same principle as a commercial wetting agent. It reduces surface tension, helps water penetrate the dry soil. I want to be clear, this is not a long-term solution, and you don't want to do this every time you water, because soap can build up in the soil and affect the chemistry over time. But as a one-time rescue treatment for a plant in hydrophobic soil crisis, it works. You pour the soap water mix slowly over the surface of the soil and give it time, pour a little, wait, pour a little more. You'll notice the water starts to be absorbed instead of running off. Follow up with a good bottom watering session an hour later to make sure the entire root zone gets saturated, and you should be in good shape. Fix 3. Repotting. Fix number 3 is the most thorough solution, and it's the one you'll need if your potting mix is just completely spent. Sometimes soil is so old, so compacted, so broken down that no amount of bottom watering or wetting agents is going to fix the fundamental problem. The mix itself needs to be replaced. Signs that you're at this point. The soil doesn't just dry out fast, it has also shrunk significantly in the pot, leaving big gaps around the edges. The soil has a very fine, dusty texture. It's lost all its original structure. The plant is root-bound. You can see roots coming out of the drainage holes or circling around the bottom of the pot when you carefully tip it out. The soil has been in the same pot for more than 2 to 3 years. If any of those sound familiar, it's time for fresh potting mix. Here's how to repot for maximum success. First, water the plant lightly the day before repotting, even if the soil is hydrophobic and doesn't absorb much. A little moisture makes the roots easier to handle without breaking. Choose a new pot that's only 1 to 2 inches larger in diameter than the current one. Going too big is a very common mistake that leads to overwatering problems. Use fresh, high-quality potting mix. Don't reuse the old stuff. Place a layer of fresh mix at the bottom of the new pot. Gently remove the plant. Shake off the old soil from the roots as much as possible. You don't need to be perfect here. And place the plant in the new pot. Fill in around the sides with fresh mix and press gently to remove large air pockets. Water thoroughly from the bottom, using the bottom watering method we talked about earlier, to make sure that first watering actually reaches the roots. After repotting, keep the plant in a slightly lower light spot for a week or 2, not dark, just out of direct sun. Repotting is stressful for plants even when done perfectly, and giving them a bit of recovery time helps a lot. Prevention. Now that we've fixed the problem, let's talk about how to never end up here again. The number one prevention strategy is simple. Don't let your soil get bone dry in the first place. For most tropical houseplants, you want to water when the top inch or 2 of soil is dry, not when the entire pot is dry. Staying ahead of that extreme drought cycle is the easiest way to prevent hydrophobic soil from developing. The second strategy, bottom water regularly, not just in emergencies. If you make bottom watering part of your regular routine, say, every other watering, your soil stays consistently and evenly moist throughout the entire pot, which prevents the kind of deep drying that leads to hydrophobia. Third, refresh your potting mix every 2 to 3 years for most plants. You don't always need a bigger pot. You can actually repot into the same pot with fresh soil. Just clean the pot well first. Fourth, if you're using a mix that's very peat-heavy, consider switching to or mixing in coco coir. Coco coir doesn't go hydrophobic the way peat moss does. It re-wets very easily even from a completely dry state. A lot of plant parents swear by coco coir blends for exactly this reason. Alright, let's do a quick recap because we covered a lot of ground today. Hydrophobic soil happens when potting mix gets so dry that it repels water instead of absorbing it. The water runs straight out the drainage hole and never reaches your plant's roots. Signs include wilting after watering, dry soil despite regular watering, and soil pulling away from the pot edges. Your 3 fixes are bottom watering, a tiny drop of dish soap in your watering can, and repotting with fresh mix when the soil is too far gone. And the best prevention is simply staying ahead of the dry cycle and refreshing your soil every couple of years. That's it. That's the whole thing. A problem that looks mysterious and stressful has a completely logical explanation and a handful of easy fixes. This is why I love plant care. Once you understand what's actually happening, nothing feels scary anymore. If this video helped you, please give it a thumbs up. It helps this channel reach more plant beginners who are out there right now pouring water straight through their pots and wondering why their plants are dying. Subscribe if you haven't already and leave a comment below telling me, have you ever experienced this? I want to hear about it.